We've just turned the calendar to a new year. What better time to turn the page to a more fulfilling life? That's exactly the journey Beyond the Crucible is charted for you in our e-course, Discover Your Second Act Significance. The 3-module video course will equip you to transform your life from, is this all there is, to this is all I've ever wanted. Each session is led by Beyond the Crucible founder Warwick Fairfax, who shares his own hard-won successes in turning trials into triumphs. And he's got some high-powered help, from USA Today's gratitude guru to a runner-up on TV's Project Runway. It's an ensemble of men and women living significant second acts who would command a 6-figure price tag if any business wanted to fill an auditorium with them to coach their employees. But we've packed their insights and action steps into our course for a sliver of that cost. And if you act before the end of January, you'll get 23% off your enrollment. Just visit secondactsignificance.com and use the code 23 for 23. So don't delay. Enroll today. And remember, life's too short to live a life you don't love. Now, here's today's podcast episode. Welcome, everyone, to Beyond the Crucible, the podcast that dares to talk about setback and failure, but not so we can commiserate, so we can elevate. I'm Gary Schneeberger, the co-host of the show, and our mission today is to offer you the hope that your crucible experiences, those tragedies and challenges you faced or are facing right now, do not define you. They refine you. They did not happen to you. They happened for you. And no one I know knows that better than the founder of Beyond the Crucible, the host of the show, and my friend, Warwick Fairfax. Warwick, we've got a good one here, and it's going to be it's going to get crowded up in here because we have 2 guests this week. So this is going to be doubly excellent, I think.
It's going to be a lot of fun. I'm really looking forward to it.
And those 2 guests, who I promised them before we got going here that I was going to not butcher, I have double the chance of messing up their bios, but here we go. Our guests today are Tom McGehee and Jim Stollberg. First, we will learn about Tom. Tom McGehee began his career by serving in the U.S. Marines for 12 years before moving to Texas, first to work on large outsourcing deals with EDS, then to become a partner with Ernst & Young Consulting. As a leader in group facilitation and collaborative work, Tom's work extends to over 25 countries and has carried him from some of the biggest boardrooms in the U.S. to some of the world's most innovative churches. In 2001, Tom left Ernst & Young to start his own company, Wave Changer, which focused on not only facilitating collaborative work, but also equipping organizations, businesses, ministries, and churches to go faster together! It was then that God led Tom to Bob Buford, who was not only a mentor and in many ways a father figure, but also a connector to a world of kingdom work through his Halftime and Leadership Network organizations. Beyond his wonderful wife and family, Tom's work is his passion and his biggest blessing. Tom became a Halftime Fellow in 2020 and has found it meaningful to be working shoulder to shoulder with his Halftime family as co-executive director since 2021. He's co-executive director because the other co-executive director is Jim Stollberg, our other guest today. Jim spent 30 years in business, holding leadership roles in the supply chain automation and management consulting industries. In 2018, Jim founded Gemini Global Advisors to assist his clients in achieving similar results to what he has delivered throughout his career. He served in several board and advisory roles with privately held market leaders, including Shipmonk, AutoStore, and here I'm going to get this wrong, Covariant.ai. Like many, Jim first heard of Halftime through the book. It was given to him by a mentor when he was in his late 20s. He loved it, but found himself committed to achieving quote-unquote success above all else. Years later, that same mentor recommended he explore becoming a Halftime Fellow, which he did in 2019. It was nothing less than transformational and led to his current role as Halftime Co-Executive Director. Jim also has a passion for social enterprise and impact investing. He and his wife, Leslie, have been married since 1991. Together, they have 2 adult children. And from my perspective, the best part of the bio, they reside in the state I also reside in, which is Wisconsin. Warwick, finally, we have 2 people from Wisconsin on the call, not another person from Australia. So I'm excited about that.
And,
Take it away.
And you're both Packers fans too, which, as we know, it's kind of mandatory if you live in Wisconsin. So
yes, and so if we're a little sad in this conversation, everybody will understand why.
Yes, indeed. Well,
I mean, that's why we wanted to do it this week before the Cowboys play on Monday. So
there you go.
So you're obviously a Cowboys fan.
I'm still up. I'm up now. Monday may be another story.
I do hear you. Well, thanks, guys, so much. I love what you both do at Halftime, and we have a lot of mutual friends from Halftime guys in Australia, Glenn Williams and John Sycamore, and some folks that have helped Signal, Cheryl Farr with branding and all, with both of us, a lot of common connections, and just your whole mission of helping folks find significance, not just success. And really, I think there, as you say in Ephesians 2:10, there's sort of God-given purpose. I just love what you do. I'm so behind it. It's sorely needed. But before we get to Halftime, and you've made some changes recently and sort of helping it to evolve for this next generation, I'd love to hear a bit about your stories, because that's obviously part of how you ended up at Halftime. So love to start with Tom, and just tell us a bit about your story and some of the background that makes you who you are, and part of the backstory that's led to where you are now.
Well, I mean, I've ended up in a place that I've helped a lot of organizations with strategy and planning, and I've ended up in a place I never could have strategized or planned to take me to, right? So I don't know what it says about my strategic ability, but it really is true. I just feel like I've got a strong faith. I feel like God's just led me to a place, and His hand has kind of been on me through good and bad to bring me here. My father was a general in the Air Force, was a career U.S. Air Force officer. I was the son he always wanted. I have an older sister. He loved me unconditionally. I had a mom, candidly, who was a little embarrassed to be pregnant at a little bit of an older age. And I came along, and there wasn't. So I kind of grew up in a house where on one end I was really cherished and loved, and on the other end I was sort of almost tolerated and not, a lot of motherly affection. And so you grow up feeling really good about yourself, but still feeling like there's something you ought to try to earn, and that's kind of wrestled with me my whole life. Went through college and decided I wanted to follow kind of my dad's footsteps in the military, went in the Marine Corps, got to do some great things there, from worked at the Marine Barracks in Washington, D.C., where we did all the security at Camp David. We did all the ceremonies for the White House. I got to command one of the first special operations company in a battalion in the Marine Corps when that was first formed. Thought I'd have a career, got passed over for promotion. And that was probably a kind of a professional crucible, pushed me out. What am I going to do now? And that series of events that have landed me from corporate work to a consulting partnership to my own company to focusing more on ministry to here. This whole time, I got married right out of college. We've been married 43 years this year. And my wife has just been a helpmate and a steadfast support, really even helping me overcome a lot of my own selfishness, my own doubts, my own, things. She's been at my side and just helped me through that. And so today we have 3 adult kids and 10 grandkids, and we're, really blessed. They all live in the Dallas area. We all get together. We had 4, the kind of crucible on the personal side. Our oldest son died about 13 years ago in a motorcycle accident. And that followed about a 10-year battle with drinking and some drugs, which itself was just sort of this prolonged crucible. That was probably the harder time, because you don't see an end and you don't know what's going to happen. The death, as hard as it is finite, and now you can kind of figure out what to do. So those are some of the things I think that have shaped my life all along, from, where I started to just being able to now work with really sort of high capacity leaders all over the world that are trying to do more for others and more beyond themselves. Is just working with somebody like Jim is just a blessing. When this opportunity came up, I asked my wife if she thought I should take it. She said, "I think God's been preparing you for this your whole life." I said, "Well, that's at this age and kind of like figuring out how you want to finish well, it's like, I'll take that, And so that's me.
It sounded like a yes, right?
Yeah. I'm going to take that and run with it. I'm not going to ask twice.
That is awesome. Well, we're going to dialogue a bit about this in a bit, but I'd love to hear just, Jim, kind of your story and your background that kind of, again, probably the Lord used that to lead you to where you are. But yeah, tell us a bit about Jim Stollberg and just, your background and upbringing.
Yeah, I'd love to. And next time, can I go first? Because like listening to Tom's stories, like mine's just not as interesting.
Hey, how do you think I feel? I co-host a podcast with a guy who lost $2.25 billion.
I totally get it, Gary. So born and raised in Wisconsin. I am a lifelong Wisconsin. I have traveled the world through my career, but never uprooted. And I think that has made, I guess, some uniqueness to my life, in that I still have. Matter of fact, I just had a call with some friends that I've known since I was in kindergarten and first grade. Right? I mean, relationships that go back to my roots, and then all the way through college and so forth. Have my family here. I've been married to Leslie for 31 years. I am blessed to have a very understanding wife and two kids that have just recently started adulting. They finished college and now they're off on their own. And we're sort of transitioning into what does it mean to be a parent of somebody adulting, right? So it's all good. Kind of grew up in a classic middle class American family. My father was a barber, and my mother worked in the school, and very loving family. We the only thing I would say kind of missing from my young years was, I think I have a faith as well. And that was not stirred. We didn't have a home church. It wasn't something that was, I think for my parents, it was more of that's a private matter. It's an internal personal thing, not a public thing. And so that sort of carried with me until the point I went to college, and I went to Marquette University here in Milwaukee, which is a Catholic Jesuit university. And at that point, it started to really, I would say, claw away at what was happening inside of me. I started to explore more about what my faith could be, and obviously got a great education out of it, graduated with my engineering degree, and then realized I was a really lousy engineer. So I went into management consulting. What do you do when you don't know where you're going to go? You go into management consulting. I did that for 10 years and really accelerated my career and kind of put me on what I later realized was a treadmill. Right? I had, for whatever reason, sort of a chip on my shoulder. I was the first one in my family to go to college, really the first among my friends. And so I really felt like my career was an opportunity to differentiate myself, right? To be successful. And I pursued it with a vengeance. And, that got me through my early years in management consulting, and then with another firm doing automation. And it was very professionally gratifying, but it was just sort of consuming my life. And I think my crucible, I would say, was not so much an event. I kind of think of it as, what's the metaphor of, how do you boil a frog, right? You just keep turning up the heat. My career that just kept turning up the heat, and I kept absorbing it. And the way the world works, right? If you're successful, they keep throwing more titles at you and more money at you. And boy, I love that. And that sort of kind of defined who I was as a person, and didn't realize how much it was distracting from the rest of my life. And that sort of hit a culmination in 2016. We had the opportunity to sell the company. And that was the event that really allowed me to take a step back and pause and really dive into why am I here, essentially, and what do I do? And that was a real catalytic event. And then, there's a whole halftime story beyond that of going through the program, helping me process through that.
Wow. Go ahead.
No, I was saying that kind of takes us to where we are today. That was in 2019, and then joined forces with Tom. I mean, it's been all the working relationships I've ever had. This is by far the most unique. And when we joined, I don't think either one of us were looking to lead anything.
Yeah.
But we were sort of, I think, put into a position where it was able to happen. And we kind of looked at each other and said, "I'll do this if you do it." And then we also made a pact that said, neither one of us can leave. If one of us leaves, the other one gets to kill him. And I'm like, I made that deal, and I'm thinking, wait, Tom's an ex-Marine. I have no military background. I got the short end of that one.
I thought it was a great deal myself.
Yeah, just it's simple. Just don't leave, and then
That's right.
So I'm in. Right. I'm in as long as Tom is.
Yeah. Well, that's great. So I'd love to hear from you both. Just you talked a bit about your Crucible experiences, because I'm guessing you would not be at halftime without those Crucibles. One of the things I've learned probably over the last few months, last year, is obviously listeners are very well aware of me growing up in a 150-year-old, very large family media business and $2.25 billion failure. And I've begun to see that failure as a gift, as a blessing, in some sense, redemption. I never would have said that a few years ago. I would have said, yeah, God has used it for his purposes, but gift, redemption, blessing, I mean, I don't know. Those are strange words, but I'd love to hear just from both of you and, in any order, in terms of about your crucibles and what that did to you, both the pain and what you learned, because it's typically excruciating pain. I mean, certainly, for you, Tom, I mean, you've gone through some excruciating ones. I mean, one in particular, but they're both tough. So talk about both the pain and what you learned from the pain.
It's interesting if I think about those two moments, and of course, anytime you have a failure, there's a pain associated with that, right? So probably a lot of little things, things you wanted or you thought you were going to do or be, and they didn't work out. But even though one was professional and it's like, okay, so that's now what's happened. Now I can figure this out and what to do from it. The other one, with our son, when he was battling his addictions, the hard thing was you kept trying to fix it, but he can only fix himself. And as a parent, it just stays with you, right? And you have that. We have a number of friends who still have adult children, for example, that are struggling with different things. And you see the phone rings in the middle of the night and you see it's his or her number, and you can't help but worry about what are you going to hear on the other end when they answer. And I mean, you wait, you want to hear something good. You want to talk to your child, but you're fearful of seeing them. It's an energy sucking place to be, right? It's hard to focus on, I know people that throw themselves into work or throw themselves, but it's hard to balance that correctly in that space, because you don't know when it's going to end. With both, when he died in a motorcycle accident, he was actually in a halfway house down near Miami. And when that happened, is again, as tragic as it was, kind of like getting passed over for promotion. I mean, that's a finite act. And now you'd say, okay, now that this has happened, what do I do? And, for me, I guess the pain of that, and I think we've processed, like my son's journey pretty well as a family. It hits all our kids different. It's my wife different, but to have the privilege now, 13 years later, to look back and just see on both events, look back on when I got out of the Marines and how this whole career of things I never could have imagined opened up, and or seeing out of this tragedy for a home, how it drew actually our family closer together. And it made me, if you have a faith, you have to decide at that moment, is this real or not? You can't just fake it anymore and say, I'll go to church and God loves me and things are great, because it's not. And you got to decide, am I bought into this or am I not? And it's it's strengthened my walk, which I then think falls into what am I doing, and doing things I haven't done before, which pushes you into another. You start a positive loop instead of a doom loop that brings you down, and that's kind of how I would say it's played out to me. There is that sort of Alcoholics Anonymous, one day at a time kind of thing, and boy, a lot of times it's like that. But I had a Marine that said, "Hey, when you're going through hell, the worst thing you can do is stop going. You gotta keep moving, gotta get through it. And if you do that and you have a hope for something beyond, and by my faith, that hope has really allowed me to get through the short-term things and to keep going. And I don't know if that answers the question, but that's it's just been a, continual, growth and reward. And, I find myself now talking about how blessed I am. And it's not that I've forgotten about all that tragedy, but it's just in a perspective that allows me to feel okay about it.
Yeah. And Tom, I've even, had a chance to witness, on a couple of occasions that the unique experience with your son, how, other half-timers who have had maybe something similar in that, how you're able to use that experience to help them. Right. Which is a real blessing. Right.
Yeah. It's a platform nobody wants, but it's a platform that gives you, or a story that gives you an opening to almost any tragedy, right? I mean, you can talk, so as you would know. And
yeah, what you said is so true. There's a lot there just in those twin tragedies. When you go through difficult times, as we say on Beyond the Crucible, you have a choice. You can hide under the covers, be angry and bitter. In your case, it would have been very understandable to be angry at God. I mean, the perennial conversation that I think most people, if they're honest, even people of faith have, how could a loving God allow my son to be taken away?
Yeah.
Couldn't he have done a miracle, healed his heart, changed his ways? And there's no good answer to that. There's other than, it's easy to say, well, God's sovereign will. That doesn't really cut it when you're in the midst of agony. I mean, I get the theology, but it's tough. And then being passed over in promotion when you want to make your parents, your dad proud. It's like, I thought I was going to be, because I think you've said earlier, in the military for my whole life. What is the deal here? I thought I was doing everything right. I mean, what did I go wrong? Maybe I don't know enough people in the right places, or I don't know, maybe I needed to politic more, or who knows? I mean, everything's different. But, and I love the other phrase you used about, when you're in hell, just you keep going to get through it. We did a series recently last fall on loss, and a number of folks who lost, spouses and just really challenging circumstances. They didn't use these words, but they all said pretty much, you head into the storm, you head right for it. They all said that, and they had very different backgrounds. And that I've thought a lot about that, and that's really another way of saying what you said. And I like just the phrase that you used about your family. I haven't experienced what you've experienced, but I can imagine as best as one can, either that would tear your family apart and tear your faith apart, or brings them together and brings your gets your faith to a stronger place. And certainly for me, I being a believer, I don't know, 40 years, I guess, last year. And when I lost the company in 1990, either that destroys your faith or brings you closer. And for me, I just clung to it closer, like a man on a ship in a raging storm, just clinging to the mast. And it drove me closer to Jesus, drove me close to the Lord. So it's just fascinating that choice. You made choices in both those instances that you were not going to let it define you or destroy you, neither you or your family. Is that fair, Tom?
It really is, and it is a choice, right? Part of the story, try to keep it short. The night my son was killed, I just landed in Orange County, and I couldn't get home that night when my wife called me to tell me. And so I'm in the hotel room by myself, and I hang up the phone after talking to everybody. Nothing I do but wait for the plane in the morning. And as clear as I've ever heard God speak, I heard him say, "Tom, do you believe what you say you believe? Because if you do, you need to see this differently." And that was kind of the defining, put it in a perspective of, okay, is my faith real? Do I believe in this God like Job that says, even if he slays me, I will praise him? And so that hung on to that part of the story. I think I actually have it right here, is my son's journal that a daughter had sent him. One of my daughters had sent him, and when he died, the verse we put on his little thing, memorial, a little handout for memorial service, is John 11, I think it's 23 and 24, that says, "He who believes in me will never die, and even if he dies, yet shall he live." And we put it on there, and about 3 months later, we got his effects back, and this journal was in it. And the last entry he had written was that exact same verse.
Mm.
And to me, that was really like, and this is, I'll tell people, if you're in the middle of the junk, you gotta look for God to do miracles. You gotta look for the miracles. And to me, that was a miracle where God said, remember when I asked you if you believe what you say you believe, this is me telling you that's the right choice. And so things like that help get me through it, help me move on, help me just trying to be aware of those things. But it is a choice. It's a choice to look for that. My wife, when he passed, my wife had to tell me, I started saying something to us. We had some real struggles. He would be mean when he got drunk, things like that. And she was like, you've got to put that out of your mind and only remember these things about him, or, it's going to be a long haul. And it's a choice you make.
So well said. So well said. So Jim, I know your path is different. It's easy, well, for both you and I, for instance, and I'm sure Gary, to hear Tom talking about, I haven't lost a son, a child, and it's easy to say what I've gone through pales into insignificance compared to that. And, one of the things I learned early on doing this podcast, we had a guy that was a Navy SEAL. In fact, his dad was Navy SEAL David Charbonnet, and he was paralyzed in a parachuting accident in Southern California. And, his dad said in all humility, my son was as good as it gets as a Navy SEAL, which you don't say as one Navy SEAL to another unless it's at least somewhat true, right? Because it would violate some code, I'm sure. So I said to him, and it was like episode 2 or 3, I said, what I've gone through is nothing compared to what you've gone through. And he said, your worst day is your worst day. It's not a competition. Yeah. That was so gracious of him, and I've never forgotten that. So, as I think about it, Jim, your story is very different, but yet, it's challenging in a different way. As you say, like the frog boiling, it's not like there's one event. But, if you believe in spiritual warfare, which would be a whole nother discussion, in some ways, a smart play is not to kind of hit you over the head with a 2x4, but kind of just slowly bore you until your faith in life is in a direction that you don't want. That's an effective strategy. And I'm sure many people in Halftime and others. So just talk about, you first want to go to college, you want to make something yourself, you're successful, you're doing great, and I'm sure people are proud of you as they should be, but just talk about there's an insidious nature to your crucible that's subtle, and I'm sure it's pretty difficult to realize you're actually in one because life is going pretty good, right? You're doing well, making money. People are saying, Jim, this is great. You're doing better than anyone in your family. Good on you, as we say in Australia. So how do you talk about that different kind of crucible that you went through and what you learned?
Yeah, thank you. It's real perceptive because that's how I feel. I mean, I think, that slow boil, I found myself in a situation where, it was something I created, selfishly. I can look back on it now and go, that whole path of success was really all about me. In fact, I had created this persona of who I was that I had to live up to, right? And not only for my family, but for, those who know me, all my friends and so forth. And so, I was thinking it started just chasing the American dream, which I did. And there's nothing wrong with that, right? I think, but the American dream sort of became all consuming. And I got to the point when I was 50, I think that's about the time when it peaked. Some would say maybe that's the midlife crisis. I don't know. There's a lot of events that happened when I turned 50. And I was in a pretty miserable spot. So if you if you knew me from the outside and you looked at me, you would think it was all great, but on the inside, I was miserable. I didn't have the joy that you should have in life, because I was waking up every day consumed by work and what I had gotten myself into, and I had no idea how to get off the treadmill. And I think, we do this exercise, and of course I wasn't smart enough at the time, but I'm better equipped now. If you said, hey, here's, list the things in order of what's really priceless to you in your life. And I know today that list would be the same as it was back then. It would be my faith. It would be my family. It would be my friends. Somewhere 4 or 5 would probably be my job, my career. But if I weighed that against where I was spending my time and all my time and literally consumption, it would have been work, work, work. And what that forced me to do is it really compartmentalized everything else, right? It was like, okay, what does a week look like? Well, I'm flying out on Sunday night. I'm working 60, 70 hours, and I get back and I got, okay, take the wife to dinner, check. All right, go to church on Sunday, check. I'd compartmentalize, go to the kids' baseball game or dance recital, check. I'm getting those things in, but I was literally living out of balance with who I said I was or who I wanted to be. And so I didn't realize it at the time. It was just this, my life was being, I would describe it as I was being fed my ego, my pocketbook were being fed by the career, but it was robbing me of my soul, right? Because I had nothing left. It was taking all my energy. And it took an event really to get me off of that, because I don't know how I could have unwound it. I was so wrapped up in my own success and my persona of success. I didn't see a way to step out of it without something happening to me. Right.
Hey, Warwick, I want to jump in here because there's something that's going on with what Jim and Tom have just described, and in conversations I've had with them prior to our recording. And both of you have said, maybe on this episode, not in so many words, but you've said it in other places where I've talked to you, that your entire identity was wrapped up in what you did. Right? Whether that was your military career, whether that was just success. So explain, as we begin to move into the next stage of this conversation where the boat turns and you guys find your way out of the crucibles, why is that such a dangerous, insidious thing for people to go through? To wrap up your identity. We've talked about it many times on the show, but to wrap up your identity in what you do, not in what, who you are, if you will, not in what is inside you, but what's outside you, what's external, what you do. Why is that such a dangerous, insidious thing?
You go first, Jim.
Yeah. I mean, I think, because it can be, it's a false narrative. Right. I mean, I think, go back to my faith. I know what the real truth is. And I was creating something that was different than the truth and then trying to live into it. And I think, even if it's something like my story where, so much of my identity was wrapped up into my career, most of us end a career. Then what? And one of the things that we deal with quite a bit with half-timers is people who have, like me, who dedicated so much of their lives to some professional achievement. And when that ends, many don't expect it, like I didn't anticipate it. Their whole identity is different. And to keep that identity wrapped up in that, it comes at a price, right? I mean, we only have so much time in a day. We only have so many days in a year. You can easily get out of balance, right? I mean, if you had asked me, how was your faith? I would have described myself back then as Christian, but I look back now and I was a convenient Christian, right? I mean, God doesn't want my leftovers. I gave him my leftovers because that's all I had left to give. And now it's easier for me to look back, having processed through that, and I'm living a more balanced life and recognizing that there's so much more. It's easier for me to understand how to prioritize what I do and where I can sacrifice. But creating that false person, that Jim's success, is a hard thing to live up to. And, this, by the way, the world loves it, right? I mean, this world, like, they want people like that because that is the American dream. And it's like, hey, great, we'll throw in another title and we'll give you some more money. And it becomes addictive. I would admit I had it like a success addiction.
Yeah.
And to the point where it's ironic that I'm on a show speaking of crucibles, because I think I was so far wired around being successful. I had a fear of failure, right? And so a lot of what guided my decision making was a fear of failure. Like I was never fired from a job. I don't know what that would have done to me. That would have been a huge failure. So I would navigate in such a way that I would avoid failure or a crucible, because I was afraid it was that was going to do to my identity, right? Mm-hmm. It would break the persona. So,
you know, when your identity is outward facing instead of inward looking, right? It can lead to all sorts of problems. I mean, having served in the military, I'll carry that the rest of my life, and there's a pride of that. And you know, so when you are that, then you know you think that's who you are. It's different, I think, even when you get in the marketplace as a businessman, because suddenly who you are is defined even more by what you do. What do you have? What do you drive? Where do you live? You know, and so in that case, in that one of your identities, like being a Marine, it's a little different. But in my case, you know, could be taken away because you move out of that. The other one, though, you try to hang on to it so much by your own performance. And I think that's the real danger of an outward-facing identity, is you're always trying to say, okay, I've got to earn this, or I've got to do more. I've somehow got to make my identity better in the eyes of someone else, rather than looking internally and saying, I got to make my identity more pure or real.
Yeah. You know, I even coming into halftime, I had sort of a false expectation that halftime was just going to help me figure out what to go do next, but it would be significant, not, you know, selfish. And so, you know, one of the things that we work on is helping you build a personal mission statement. And a personal mission statement is phenomenal. It gives you clarity around, you know, who are you called, how are you called to do things in life, right? To be more significant. But one of the other things we do that I think gives balance to that, because quite often a mission can be a lot like success, right? Living a life of success in significance can look a lot the same. We try to complement that with a being statement, right? Which is who you really called to be. And when I think of that, that's way beyond just what I go do. It's who am I as a husband, as a father, as a friend. And so really getting clarity on who we're called to be is really important.
Yep.
You know, what you just said is so important. And I want to transition really to what you guys now do as co-chief executives of Halftime, and how you got there. And it started by a famous founder, Bob Buffett, and you try to, you know, as all organizations need to evolve and grow, and want to hear more about that. But yeah, just the whole issue of identity for me, as listeners know, as being a Fairfax and a 150-year-old family media business that had about as much power and money as you could want, but it also had respect. Now, from the world's perspective, what more is there? Power, money, and respect. That's the trifecta. You've got it all, right? The community, whether it's left, right, whoever it is, everybody respected the Fairfax family as people that were really producing quality newspapers that were serving the nation of Australia. You had respect, honor, admiration, money, power. We had it all. So yeah, there was a lot of identity wrapped up in that. But I remember when my father left as chairman of the company, that sounds kind of biblical, was thrown out by some other family members. Invitations dried up, you know, to embassy functions and big functions. It's like, well, you were invited based on your title, not who you are. That's sobering when they say, you know, Jim, Tom, you were invited to this. We'd actually like you not to come because we didn't invite you as a person. It's not personal, but it seems extremely personal at the time. So, and I love what you said, Jim, about it's one of the things I've really tried to focus on in the last few years is, even from a church or kingdom perspective, you can get wrapped up in numbers. Hey, is our church, I'm an elder of a non-denominational church in Maryland. Hey, is our church 2,000? Well, how do we get to 3, 4, 5,000? It's like, how many programs can we start? I'm sure at Halftime it's the same. So when my book came out a bit over a year ago, I remember almost physically on my knees to the Lord saying, I will not be defined by whether it says my book sells 1, 1,000 copies, 10,000, 100,000. It will not define me. And, you know, how many podcasts, downloads, and it's all going well, but I'm not doesn't make me a better human, a bit more faithful to God. I mean, I will not be defined by numbers. Doesn't mean we shouldn't measure them, but does that make sense? So
Absolutely.
anyway, so I want to make sure we get into what you guys do now. So talk about Halftime, how it's evolving, but how you got there and kind of what you guys' collective vision is for moving forward. Because it's tough to, take on the reins of an organization that has a lot of respect and a lot of success and say, we love Halftime. We want to kind of evolve it a bit. It's like, say what?
Yeah.
You're desecrating the sacred cow. What would Bob Buford think? And obviously he's, love his book, but he's passed a number of years ago. So just talk about how you got there and what your vision is, so to speak, for Halftime.
Yeah. I think one of the things that's made this really a great balance with Jim and I is I knew Bob. I was able to, he was there for me because he'd lost his son. He was there for me when that happened. He was there to help me mentor starting my own company, working. He was the conduit for which my company was able to spend time working with nonprofits and churches as well as Fortune 100 companies. And I knew him well. I actually designed the very first Halftime sessions 20 years ago for him. So I've got a history of knowing Halftime, working with them, and then being around them all this time. Jim comes in through the Fellows program with really fresh eyes, and so it's really been a nice blend as we've looked at who were we, who are we, and who do we want to be. And when we took the job, we started, both of us, they had called me back into the sphere to help create a new global strategy. Jim was on the board and became part of the design team, and we were working together on this strategy. And one of the things we said was, and we were given the permission, we said, we're going to question everything. And so including the idea of has Halftime run its course? It's 25 years, maybe it's, maybe it's not supposed to be a full-on ministry anymore. I mean, that's an option. And so as you pray through that, you look at things, it's become there are an awful lot of ministries that do similar things now, right? Back when Bob wrote the book, he was pretty much the pioneer in this area. Yeah. So we really had to take a look at where are we now and where do we want to go? And I do remember I got a call from Linda Buford, Bob's widow. And I've known her for a while, but it was she called me and said, hey, I understand you're looking at a lot of things. And even if you had to change the name and it was no longer Halftime, Bob would be okay with that because you need to do what you think's best to carry this on. And I was like, wow, that was just there's a brand there. We haven't changed it. We're going to hold on to that. And there's a lot of, but how do you take something that it's got some baggage to it, but it is really well known, and how do we build on that? And we've tried to do it, but we had a board of directors and stuff that gave us the option to look at all of that, which let us think out wide and then come back to what we thought was a balanced approach for the future.
Yeah, and as Tom said, I think unfortunately I never had the chance to meet Bob, although I think I really feel like I know Bob from this being around so many people whose lives have been influenced by him, right? But I came to the table with very fresh eyes when I finished the Fellows program in 2020. Was February of 2020. That the mentor who originally gave me the book years and years ago, prior to that, was on the board and asked me to join the board. And I thought, we have this term we call low-cost probes, right? You don't have to overcommit, but test things out. And I thought, joining the Halftime board would be a great low-cost probe. Well, it didn't end up staying that way, but it was an opportunity for me, I think, to give. At the time, my perspective was, how could I give back to Halftime? Because I had such a phenomenal experience. As I said, in my bio, it was transformational for me, and I know we've transformed thousands of people's lives. But I also felt like there was more. Right? There were some things like, for example, when our program ended. It was February of 20. It just ended, right? It was like we were all together. I had a great cohort. There was about a dozen of us, and we just had an incredible experience together. And then it ended. And I thought, well, why does it have to end? Right? Why not? If our lives are really transformed and changed, I realized I joined a program But in the essence, I really came to realize I joined this journey that's never going to end for the rest of my life. And for me, what really touched me was, how can we help serve the journey?
Yep.
Warwick, you mentioned Ephesians 2:10, right? I mean, that's been our foundational scripture of helping people find their calling, which we do an incredible job at. But what we felt we were called to do is, how do you help them not just find it, but live it out? And living it out means community and more connections and living intentionally. And so that's the big change from, hey, just come and do a program and then, go forth and prosper. Really, really engage and stay in this community around the world.
Yeah, that's so well said, Jim. I know one of the things you've done with the rebranding is the old one was, from success to significance. The first half of your life is for success, and second half of your life, which, what does that mean? 40s, 50s, you retire. Gee, I've got money and flexibility. I really want to use it for the Lord now. And I remember thinking, in all honesty, that there was something about that. I just, I read the book many years ago. I thought, I try not to be judgmental. There was something about it that's like, who am I to judge? Yeah. But I feel like you've because then what do you do if you're a 20, 30 something that you want to seek God's purpose in your life? And so,
yeah. You do what I did. You put the book on the shelf and you pull it out 20 years later, right?
So talk about that. I love what you said, Tom, about what Linda Buford said. He was so gracious. So, I mean, obviously, I think you saw some of that. So talk about what the mission is now and how you made that transition without people saying, because there had to have been a few people that saying, hang on. Yeah. I don't think Bob would have liked this. And you said, well, Tom could have said, well, I've known him for decades. I think he would have. But, I don't know, getting an argument's don't get you there. But talk about that transition, because you're not trying to make Bob Buford wrong, but yet you're also trying to encompass people who are younger than 60 or 50 to be direct, right? You want to cover everybody. So how did you make that transition, and how would you define who you are now versus who you were there? So it had to be difficult. Anytime you try and make a transition from a famous founder, that's not easy to do well without antagonizing a lot of people.
I know that well from my own professional experience.
I think one of the things when we had those conversations is to separate the essence from the way it's presented. Right. So the essence of Bob Buford when he started, and I got to see that before there was a halftime ministry, there was Bob Buford who wrote a book. It touched people's lives and they flew in to see him, and he didn't want anything from you. And so he didn't charge you anything. He was just helping you go do what you do. And it was a movement that was created. Right. And so part of what we thought about is over the years, because now it's got to be self-sustaining, it had withdrawn from sort of being a movement into being a program that we could sell and measure numbers and things like that. So part of it we felt was we were actually trying to get back to what it was that Bob started, which was more of a movement. So at least that was the spin we'd put on it, right? Because that's what we believe, that you really want to reach out. And so when we rebranded, the halftime logo was the word half, and then it had a line, and then it had the word time. If you look at it now, it's just one word, because we wanted to get rid of the sort of first half, second halves, or success to significance. And talk about a halftime, like in sports, is just a moment when you say, you know what, I should take a pause here and decide where am I and what is it I feel called to do, and then get back in the game. And that's kind of how we've tried to position it. And we started in addition to halftime, building off the programs and the ways we help people do that. We've created a thing called Thousandfold, and we described Thousandfold as a global impact community inspired by halftime, because we didn't want it to be halftime alumni. We didn't want it to be something we owned. We wanted it to be something that could potentially be a conduit to connect to all sorts of things happening out there, to give its members access to other members and resources and ideas to help them do whatever God's calling them to do. So we hope we're leveraging both, and we're kind of getting back to what it was, but still holding on to the essence of who we are, and trying to apply it in a way that is applicable to your point, to somebody who it's not just Bob's story, right? That success to significance was Bob's story. Built a company, sold it, went and did this. Especially today, there are an awful lot of people, especially younger people in the market, who are like, they want to be successful and significant at the same time. Mm-hmm. They want to know their business has worth. And so we want to help them say, okay, do you stay where you are and do something differently? Are you being called to something? We want to be in those conversations, not, once you're done, give us a call and we'll,
yeah.
Before you move to Florida and take up the country club, give us a call. We know. Yeah, we really want to move out of that space.
Well said. Jim, what's your take?
Yeah, and I would just add, I think the response has been real positive. And, so we wanted to make sure that we would honor the legacy of what Bob created with Halftime. And again, it's got great brand equity, right? And our friends at Signal helped us to understand that. So how could we build on it, but also maybe reposition it, as Tom said, right? It's not just a one and done. You get one shot at halftime when it's success to significance. What if we think of it as a pause of when you can take some time to process things? You could have multiple halftimes in your life, right? Depending upon of different events, but then have this constant of thousandfold of this community that surrounds you, that's of like-mindedness, that can help you accelerate, help you deal with whatever you need to deal with on the ongoing journey, not just in a one-year program. And so that branding was something that we really wanted to make a bigger tent, because we think it's potential to be bigger than just halftime.
I love what you're saying about the way that you've defined halftime is not like it's cut in two, but it's funny. I tell everybody who's a guest on the show in describing how Warwick and I interact as host and co-host. If we were a sports commentating team, he's the play-by-play announcer, I'm the color commentator. Let's go into a sports context with you guys and halftime, right? How many times do we hear during the broadcast of a game about halftime adjustments, right? That's what halftime's for in football. That's what halftime's for in basketball. The coach is making adjustments. What maybe could have gone better in the first half, how are we going to change it to make it go better in the second half? So I think that is something I think people can get their arms and their minds around, hopefully, pretty easily.
Yeah, and there's also timeouts, right? So think about when you're calling a timeout, when something's not going right.
Right.
What do? You call a timeout and you process it. And I think, in the essence of what halftime does, we can help serve in those timeouts as well. It doesn't have to be just the halftime, right, of life.
So one of the things have, for example, in September, we published a book, Women at Halftime, that was written by two of our women coaches. And if you think about a woman, a lot of our halftime experience programs and stuff have been aimed at men and women who really have led a corporate kind of track, a business track. Well, in this case, what about the woman who started down that track and then maybe she decided to stay home for a while, raise the kids or something, and now she wants to get back engaged, or maybe she worked on something that the point is she's taken a different track sometimes, but is still in the place of saying, I'd really like to find out who I am. My wife is going through this now. Who am I outside of being a mom, a grandmother, and a wife? And it's like, okay, how can we serve that person, just as well as we can serve people who are right in the middle of doing what they're doing, but they don't want to wait to do something significant until they're older. We've got 25 years of experience. Can we figure out how to package it where we can make it available to help people where they are when they need it? That's our intent.
I love what you're saying, Tom and Jim, just your courage to help halftime evolve. And obviously, I've never met Bob Buford, but I'd like to think he would say, what you're doing is making my vision relevant to this generation and to more people, and, obviously you would be in a better position, especially Tom, to know that. But yeah, and I love that concept of pause, because you could be 18, 25, 35, 45, and you hit moments in time. A young person might say, well, my dad was a lawyer, but I'm in law school, but I don't know that I really want to be a lawyer. Maybe I like sculpting or something.
Right.
And it's like you've come to a bit of a mini crucible. Do I disappoint my parents? Do I keep going? So you can hit pauses at any stage of life, and helping people realize living a life of significance and, from a halftime perspective and mine, living a life in line with God's purpose, that's a conversation that can never happen too soon. The earlier, the better.
For me, I love that. I mean, and for me, it's personal, right? I mean, I think based on my own personal experience, what I described to you, two things. One is if I can help others, this is why I'm here, right? If I can help others process and transition through what I went through, that's a gift for me. But second is if I can avoid someone doing what I did, who read the book at 25 or 30, whatever it was, and then ignored it because I didn't think I was at halftime. I want to help those people. I'm working with my son right now who's turning 25 this year on, the classic, don't do what your dad did. Right. So,
right. I'm sure you look back and think, gosh, Jim, if somebody had come to you when you're 35 and somebody that you respect would have had to have been and said, like, you're successful, the sky's the limit, but, you can be successful and maybe have purpose and significance. Let's talk about that. That would have been a wonderful gift if you'd met somebody at 35 rather than 50 or wherever, and you're trying to help people in that stage. And
right.
In addition to the whole pause, which can happen at any time in life, I love what you both saying, Tom and Jim, about the whole concept of community. I mean, amongst other things, I'm a certified International Coach Federation executive coach, and coaching, is really about an ongoing engagement in a sense. Studies show that you can be trained at some great training and corporations spend millions of dollars, but typically it only lasts a few weeks and then the knowledge fades and you go back to how you typically operate. So it's not a good investment. Yeah. So companies are evolving now into a model of training and coaching. That's more today's corporate America, at least in the best areas. And in a sense, you're doing that in that you provide great training, but with this whole engagement and thousandfold model, it's like, okay, I understand I want to live a life of significance. I want to live a life on purpose. What's God's purpose? And this has come up, and should I leave or not leave? Because maybe this is God's plan, maybe it's not God's plan. And what do you do in the day-to-day trenches, so to speak? That's where that community can make all the difference in taking people's
completely
life to a whole other level. So this is, I don't know about Buford, but I would have thought he would say, this is awesome, right? I mean, I guess you probably can't help but ask that question, but does that make sense?
Well, that's
both of you?
Absolutely. Trying to discern that on your own is, I mean, I can't imagine trying to go through this on my own. There's just no way I would have ever been capable of figuring that out. And my cohort, as an example, was so helpful, I think, to each other. We helped each other, and we still do to this day, right? I mean, helping you think through some things and process it, because you're not alone, right? So it's, yes, the coaching is really a core element, as well as some of the content, but the cohort, really, you're surrounding yourself with, a peer advisory group, if you think about it that way, and who have no vested interest other than your interest, which is a really beautiful thing.
Yeah. And along those lines, I was thinking from the crucible idea. I mean, I think a lot of time even churches or ministries paint this idea that somehow if you get into that kind of work, your life's going to somehow be grand and you're not going to be problems. And I mean, crucibles come up all over the place, and you've got to work through them. The community idea, we had a 1,000-volt call. I think it was Wednesday morning. I was on it. And one of the guys on there was talking about, he lives up in Ohio, and he's still doing low-cost probes. He's not sure what's next. That afternoon, I got a call from a former half-timer who said, "Hey, we're looking for an executive director for a ministry in Ohio. Do you know anybody that might?" And I'm like, I don't know if this is meant to be or not, but when I meet this guy in the morning and you call me in the afternoon, I've got to at least put you guys together and let you talk about it, right? And what we want to enable are those kind of interactions all over the place. And that's where, that's the hope, because you can be out there. If you're on a journey to really discover who you are and what you would be at your best and how you could be most fulfilled, if you're not careful, that can be a lonely journey. You start to turn too much inward, right? And the hope here is that we can connect you to others on the same journey to help you, do it in community, because we're relational beings. I think it's the way it should be done.
This is the time in the show where I normally say, that sound you heard is the captain turning on the fasten seatbelt sign, plane's going to land. But come on. We've been talking about halftime all the time. We've been making sports metaphors. So I'm going to say the time has arrived, and I'm going to say this because I have a fellow Packer fan in this call with me, in Jim. I'm going to say it's the fourth quarter, and the 2-minute warning has just come upon us. At this time, as we take a break, as we take a little bit of a time out here, I would be remiss, guys, if I didn't give you the opportunity to let people know how they can get in touch with you and some of the things that you offer. And also to ask you this question as you tell people how they can find you. What would you say is the question, right? As people hear this, as our listeners hear this, what question that fires in their mind is one that you can help with? If they're getting that question, they're hearing this stuff, it's stirring some things up in their spirit about what they should do next. So let people know how they can find you and what are some of the things they might be thinking that you can help them with.
Go ahead, Jim.
Well, so the easiest way to find us would be you can go to halftime.org or thousandfold.org, and they'll cross-reference each other, but it's got quite a bit of information out there about what we do and what we can provide and how you can get in contact with someone. Regarding the question, we often refer to this sense of smoldering discontent, which goes back to the book when Bob wrote it. So if you're feeling, it's funny, I have this story, this guy that we went to it and did a session with, and he said, I don't really identify with smoldering discontent, but I got this feeling like God has something more for me, and I'm not quite sure what it is, and I need to figure that out. And I said, you just defined smoldering discontent. So you did get it. So I think it's it's an inner feeling. It's an inner sense that things just aren't aligned, right? That maybe there's something more or something different from where I'm at today. And that is probably the big broad theme of what we help people think through and process through in halftime. And it's very powerful, and people, it's a very intentional process, and we give people permission and the tools and the surrounding with other people to process that.
Maybe the only thing I'd add is one of the things that we now talk about, and we've talked about it for years, but kind of honed in on it. The idea is we like to work with people to help them get clear, get free, and get going. And I think if, again, the smoldering discontent, I want to get clear on who I am and what I'm told to do. I want to get free of the things that are stopping me from doing that. And then I want to get going. I want to get about it. And with thousandfold and halftime both, we think we've got a full ability to support that. And one of the things we've learned is that sequence is really important, right? If you just, you try to get going first, you kind of trade one treadmill for the other. Mm-hmm. You can run a ministry or nonprofit and work more hours than you did when you were in the corporate world. Or if you try to get free first, it seems like you just never do. I need a little bit more. I need some, boy, I'm going to do it. But if you get clear, then it becomes something you can't not do. There's an old French poet, Bob used to quote, that said something about your destiny will follow you like an accusing shadow. Mm-hmm. If you come in touch with what you think your destiny, maybe you can't not do it. I feel called to that. And I think we're fairly uniquely positioned to help you think through that and move forward. And it's certainly our heartbeat to help, men and women do that. So.
Wow. Well, so well said. Just as we close, a couple of things occur to me. I love just how you're saying that at any stage of life, you can hit the pause button and think, what is God's purpose? I love this whole thousandfold group. One of the things that I've found over the years is it's not easy to find like-minded people who you can talk to. You might have friends or family. Jim, back in your corporate days, you could have talked to some buddies and said, well, I don't know, success is pretty good to me. I didn't go to college. Nobody in my family went to college, and I have a great house, a boat, maybe a place on the lake. Life's pretty good. What are you complaining about, Jim? Get your head out of the sand. Life is good. You know, there's nothing wrong. Oh, okay, thank you. Good. Now I don't need to question. Well, that wouldn't serve you, right? You didn't, as well-meaning as that person could have been, that would not have served you, 20 years ago or wherever. So having people that really are trying to say, life is more than just success. What's God's purpose for my life? And you're in there in the trenches together trying to figure it out. If you surround yourself with the wrong people, you'll get the wrong advice.
Yeah.
If you surround yourself with the groups that you're going to have in thousandfold, it's not guaranteed you'll hear, perfect advice from the Lord, but the odds are much, much greater that you'll be in a climate that helps you find God's purpose. So I think, being in a group of people is helpful. You got to be with the right group of people. It's like having advisors is good, but you can have the right advisors, competent with the right heart and the right values, right?
So true.
And so what you're doing at Halftime and Thousandfold cannot be underrated. So just as we end, there might be a businessman or woman that could be anywhere from 20s to 50s to 60s, and maybe they're successful, they've got good grades, life is good, maybe they've had some speed bumps, but maybe they don't even have time to think. What would a word of hope, or maybe a word that would actually stop them in their tracks and make them think a bit, so that they're not coming to you at 85 and they're on their deathbed and, gosh, what do I do now? That's not your target market, right? People who've, at that point, you'll do whatever you can, but you want to hit them a bit earlier than 85, I'm guessing. So, not judging here, but what would a word of hope or a word that maybe stop people in their tracks so that they would think about life and halftime and God's purpose?
That's a great question. I mean, the thing that comes to mind for me is intentional. If you intentionally, if you feel that smoldering discontent, you have to be intentional about following up on it. My personal lesson learned is I was really good at suppressing that and just filling my time continuing on that treadmill. And it wasn't until I was intentional about a freedom of jumping off that treadmill that things changed. And now I look back at it and say, why did I wait so long? Right. I mean, I got over the regret of, boy, if I had done this 15, 20 years ago, it could have changed my path, but you can't get hung up on that. But I would really want to encourage people of, there's no time like the present to start, because there'll never be the perfect time to do it. Right.
Yeah, Bob interviewed me a number of years ago for a book he was writing, and my quote, I had forgotten it until now, as I said, there's the risk you can't afford to take, and there's the risk you can't afford not to take. And if you're in your 20s and you've got little kids in diapers, I mean, you're probably full on, right? I mean, it's hard to think of more, but that season you will move on from that. And if you just keep putting it off, that, like I said, when I get to this stage, I'm going to think of something more about me or more about what I'm called to do, or whatever. That rarely does that come. I love Jim's word on intentionality. I mean, there are things you can begin reading books now about who are you and what do you think you're called to be. If you can't do anything else about it, there are ways you can start to be intentional at any stage of your life to be, live this life of something that's significant, something that's really fulfilling and gives you the abundance that you were created for.
That sound you heard, listener, was the final buzzer, indicating that our conversation with Jim and Tom has come to its very rich and very robust conclusion. Until the next time that we are together, we ask that you remember the principles that you heard in this conversation. And that is, we understand for sure that your crucible experiences are difficult. They hurt. They can linger after you've gone through them. But if you learn the lessons of them, if you keep, as Warwick says often now, keep going toward the battle, keep going toward the storm. If you keep doing that, one foot in front of the other, baby steps, keep doing that. That is not the end of your story, that crucible. In fact, it can be the beginning, the launching point, dare we say, halftime, a pause as you move forward, because what ends up happening if you follow that path is you will reach the best story of your life, because where it ends is at a life of significance. If you enjoyed this episode, learned something from it, we invite you to engage more deeply with those of us at Beyond the Crucible. Visit our website, beyondthecrucible.com, to explore a plethora of offerings to help you transform what's been broken into breakthrough. A great place to start? Our free online assessment, which will help you pinpoint where you are on your journey beyond your crucible and to chart a course forward. See you next week.